The Brave Hunter and the Magical Drum. Long ago, in a village nestled deep within the lush green forests of Africa, lived a young hunter named Kofi. He was the son of the village's most skilled hunter, and from a young age, Kofi dreamed of following in his father's footsteps. However, unlike his father, Kofi was filled with curiosity about the mysteries of the world. He wanted to not only hunt, but explore the secrets of the forest. One day, while hunting alone, Kofi came across an ancient tree that stood taller than any he had ever seen. The tree's bark shimmered in the sunlight, and its roots seemed to pulse with an energy that intrigued Kofi. He had heard stories of magical places in the forest, but had never believed them, until now. As he approached, something unusual caught his eye. A drum, intricately carved and nestled between the roots of the great tree. The drum looked like no ordinary instrument. Its surface was etched with symbols Kofi did not recognize, and it seemed to hum with a life of its own. Drawn by its beauty, Kofi picked up the drum, feeling its smooth surface beneath his fingers. Suddenly, a deep voice echoed in his mind. Whoever holds this drum holds the power to grant wishes. Startled, Kofi dropped the drum but quickly picked it up again, his heart racing. Could this be true? Was this the legendary drum of wishes he had heard whispered about in the village? Kofi's hands trembled as he held the drum close, realizing he had stumbled upon something far more powerful than he had imagined. He decided to take the drum home but knew he must keep its magic a secret, at least for now. Back in the village, Kofi sat in his small hut, staring at the drum. The temptation to make a wish was overwhelming. What would he ask for? Wealth? Fame? Or something more? After much thought, he decided on something simple. I wish for a feast, Kofi whispered, tapping the drum softly. Suddenly, before him appeared an elaborate spread of food, fruits, roasted meats, and fragrant dishes, more than Kofi had ever seen in his life. He gasped, unable to believe his eyes. But then, a strange feeling washed over him. As much as the food delighted him, he felt a weight in his chest, knowing that such power came with responsibility. Despite his amazement, Kofi knew that keeping the feast to himself would not be right. He gathered his closest friends and invited them to share in the meal. The village celebrated into the night, unaware of the drum's magic. Kofi watched everyone laugh and eat, but deep inside, he wondered about the drum's true potential. He had only scratched the surface of its power. But he already felt the pull of something darker, a desire to use it for more. Later that night, as the village slept, Kofi lay awake, staring at the drum. The first wish had been innocent enough. What if he wished for something more ambitious? He could do anything, become the richest man, the most powerful warrior, or even the ruler of the entire region. But a warning voice whispered in his ear, reminding him of the tales of greed he had heard as a child. The next morning, Kofi sought out the village elder, an old man named Adisa, who was known for his wisdom and knowledge of the old stories. Without revealing the drum, Kofi asked the elder about the legends of magical objects. Adisa's eyes narrowed as he spoke. Magic always comes with a price, young one. Many have found objects of great power but lost themselves to greed. Adisa continued, The forest is alive, Kofi. It gives gifts, but it watches how they are used. Those who seek to take more than they need will find themselves cursed by the very power they thought they controlled. Kofi listened intently, realizing the weight of his discovery. He had the power to change his life, but it could also destroy him. Despite Adisa's warning, Kofi's curiosity and ambition grew. One night, after hours of contemplation, he made his second wish. This time, he asked for strength. More than any hunter in the village. I wish to be the strongest hunter in all the land, he said, his voice steady as he tapped the drum. The next day, Kofi felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. His reflexes were sharper, his muscles stronger, and his senses heightened. He easily outmatched the other hunters on the hunt, bringing down game with remarkable ease. But with this new strength came a strange feeling of isolation. The other hunters, once his friends, began to distance themselves from him, sensing that something about Kofi had changed. As Kofi's hunting prowess grew, so did the tension in the village. The other hunters whispered behind his back, wondering how he had become so powerful so quickly. Some accused him of cheating or using dark magic, while others simply grew jealous of his success. Kofi could feel the rift forming between him and his friends, and it weighed heavily on his heart. One evening, as he sat alone by the fire, Kofi began to question whether the drum's magic was a blessing or a curse. It had given him strength, but it had also brought loneliness and suspicion. He had gained power, but at what cost? The village that once embraced him now looked at him with fear and distrust. Haunted by the growing tension, Kofi returned to the ancient tree where he had found the drum. As he approached, he felt the same strange energy that had first drawn him to the drum. But this time, it was different. The forest seemed to whisper to him, its voice gentle yet firm. "Do not take more than you need, Kofi. The power of the drum is not for the greedy." Kofi stood silently, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves. He realized that the forest was warning him. He had been careless with his wishes, and now he needed to make a choice. Would he continue to use the drum for selfish gain, or would he heed the warning and learn from his mistake? Kofi spent several sleepless nights, turning the drum over in his hands, wondering how something so small could hold such immense power. The village had once celebrated his success, but now he felt a growing distance. People whispered when he walked by, their eyes filled with both awe and suspicion. Even his closest friends, Kwame and Ama, began to avoid him. In his heart, Kofi knew that the drum had given him what he asked for, but it had also started taking from him his friendships, peace, and perhaps even his future. He remembered Elder Adisa's words, "Magic always comes with a price." And as he sat alone in his hut, Kofi realized that the true burden of power was not in having it, but in learning how to control it. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kwame knocked at Kofi's door. The two had not spoken in days, and Kofi was surprised to see his friend standing there. Kwame, with his serious gaze, wasted no time. "Kofi, something is wrong. People are saying you have been touched by magic, and it's changing you. They say you've made dangerous choices." Kofi was silent for a moment. He'd feel the weight of the drum sitting nearby, hidden under his bed. "What if I have?" Kofi finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I found something powerful, something that could give me anything I desire?" Kwame's eyes widened, but instead of excitement, he looked afraid. "That kind of power, it can destroy you, Kofi. You have to be careful. You must think of the village, not just yourself." Kwame's words pierced through Kofi's heart like an arrow. He realized, in that moment, that his friend was right. He had become consumed by the drum's magic, and his wishes had brought nothing but trouble. Kofi promised Kwame that he would stop using the drum recklessly. He would no longer make wishes for his own gain. But deep inside, Kofi wondered if he had the strength to keep that promise. Before Kwame left, he handed Kofi a small carved figure. "Gift. This is for protection, Kofi. Keep it close and remember who you are." Kofi held the small figure in his hands, feeling its rough edges. It was a reminder that, no matter what power he had, he was still Kofi, the hunter, the boy who loved the forest and his village. Despite his promise, the drum called to Kofi in the silence of the night. It whispered to him of things he could not resist: power, wealth, control. Though he fought against it, one night, Kofi found himself sitting before the drum once more. This time, he was careful. He did not wish for strength or wealth. Instead, he wished for something that seemed harmless: knowledge. "I wish to understand the secrets of the forest," he whispered, his voice steady. The drum hummed in response, and for a moment, nothing happened. But as Kofi lay down to sleep, his dreams were filled with visions of the forest, its creatures, its plants, and its ancient magic. He saw the stories of the ancestors and the hidden pathways that no man had ever traveled. When he awoke, he felt wiser. But with that knowledge came a deep sense of responsibility. With his newfound knowledge, Kofi's hunting improved once again. He knew the best places to find game, the safest paths through the dense jungle, and the ways to avoid the traps of dangerous predators. But the more he learned, the more he realized how fragile the balance of the forest truly was. He saw how one mistake could destroy the harmony of the land, and this filled him with a growing sense of unease. Villagers, however, did not see his inner struggle. They only saw his success. Kofi, the wise hunter they called him. Kofi felt no pride in the title. The secrets of the forest were heavy on his heart. He knew that with great power came great responsibility, and if he wasn't careful, he could upset the very forces that sustained their way of life. One afternoon, as Kofi ventured deep into the jungle, came across an injured lion. Its golden eyes were filled with pain, and its powerful body lay weak and broken. Kofi knew that a hunter's instinct was to strike quickly, but something held him back. He remembered the knowledge he had gained from the forest, delicate balance between life and death. Instead of killing the lion, Kofi kneeled beside it and used the herbs he had seen in his dreams. Slowly, the lion regained its strength. It looked at Kofi, its eyes filled with gratitude, or disappearing into the depths of the jungle. Kofi realized that this was a test. The forest had given him knowledge, not just for his own gain, but to protect and preserve the world around him. While Kofi's connection with the forest grew stronger, his relationships in the village continued to falter. Amma, who had once been his closest companion, had been distant. She had heard the rumors of Kofi's strange behavior and magic, but when she returned to his side, it was not out of fear. Concern. "Kofi," Amma said softly, "I see you've changed, but is it for the better?" Kofi did not know how to answer. He wanted to believe that he had grown wiser and more responsible, but he could feel the weight of his mistakes still pressing down on him. "I'm trying, Amma," Kofi admitted. "The drum, it's powerful, but dangerous. I'm learning how to use it wisely." Amma nodded but warned, "You must be careful, Kofi. Even knowledge can lead to ruin if it is used for the wrong reasons." As days turned into weeks, Kofi felt a storm gathering on the horizon. Not a storm of rain or wind, but something far more dangerous. The drum's magic was growing stronger, and Kofi sensed that the forest was watching him closely. There were signs everywhere. The trees whispered in languages he didn't understand, and the animals seemed to avoid him. Kofi knew that he was approaching a turning point. The choices he made from now on would not only affect his life, but the lives of everyone in the village. He had gained knowledge, strength, and wisdom, but with each gift came a deeper understanding of the dangers that lay ahead. Kofi awoke to the sound of whispering. At first, he thought it was the wind blowing through the trees, but as the whispers grew louder, he realized they were coming from the drum. The symbols on the drum's surface seemed to glow faintly in the darkness of his hut. They beckoned him, filling his mind with visions of more wishes, greater power, endless riches, control over the village and beyond. He pushed the drum away and covered it with a cloth. The whispers lingered. Kofi had been strong so far, but he could feel doubt creeping into his heart. Could he truly resist the temptation forever? What if he made one final wish, something small, significant, something that could help the village? As he wrestled with these thoughts, Kofi realized that his greatest battle was not against the dangers of the forest or the villagers' suspicions, but against himself. As the moon reached its highest point in the sky, the village prepared for the annual festival of the ancestors. It was a time to honor the spirits of those who had come before, offering thanks for their protection and guidance. The entire village was decorated with colorful fabrics, masks, and beads, and the air was filled with the sound of drums and singing. Kofi felt uneasy as he watched the preparations. The sound of the village drums reminded him too much of his own magical drum, hidden away in his hut. He decided to participate in the festival, hoping it would ease his troubled mind. As the villagers danced and sang under the moonlight, Kofi tried to lose himself in the rhythm, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something ancient and powerful. During the festival, as the flames of the bonfire leaped into the night sky, Kofi suddenly felt dizzy. His vision blurred, and he stumbled away from the crowd, seeking a quiet place to rest. As he sat beneath a large baobab tree, the world around him shifted. The voices of the villagers faded, and the crackling of the fire disappeared. In its place, Kofi heard a new sound, a soft, melodic hum that filled the air. In his vision, the great tree before him split open, revealing a glowing figure. It was an ancestor, clothed in robes of light, her eyes piercing yet kind. She stepped forward and spoke. "Kofi, you have been given a great gift, but you are walking a dangerous path. The drum you carry was meant for one who understands the weight of their choices. Do you?" Kofi, frozen by the vision. "Only listen." The ancestor continued. The wishes you make ripple through the land, affecting not just you but all who live here. Each wish draws you closer to a point of no return. Be wise, Kofi, for the forest is watching. As the figure faded, Kofi blinked, finding himself back at the festival, his heart racing. The vision left him shaken. He knew now that the drum's magic was far more dangerous than he had realized. The day after the festival, the village elders called a meeting. A drought had begun to affect their crops, and the hunters were struggling to find game. The village was in danger of running out of food if the rains did not return soon. The elders asked for volunteers to travel to neighboring villages and request help. Kofi felt the weight of the drum under his bed. With a single wish, he could bring the rains, end the drought, and save his people. But the memory of the ancestors' warning lingered in his mind. He had promised Kwame and Amma that he would be responsible, but now the village was in desperate need. Could he truly ignore the power of the drum when his people were suffering? Kofi struggled with the decision, knowing that another wish could deepen the dark hold the drum had on his life. That night, as the stars blinked brightly overhead, Kofi sat alone with the drum in his hands. His heart ached for the village, the children who were hungry, the farmers whose fields were turning to dust. Just one wish, Kofi whispered to himself, and everything will be better. He touched the drum gently, and the familiar hum filled the air around him. I wish for rain, he said softly, his voice trembling. As the last word left his lips, the sky above rumbled, and dark clouds began to gather. Within moments, burst drops of rain fell, quickly turning into a heavy downpour. Kofi stood in the rain, his face lifted to the sky, feeling a strange mixture of relief and fear. He had saved the village, but at what cost? The villagers rejoiced as the rain continued to fall for days, filling the dry riverbeds and nourishing the crops. Kofi watched from a distance, his heart heavy despite the joy around him. He had expected to feel proud of his decision, but instead, he felt hollow. He had made another wish, and though it had saved the village, he knew the power of the drum was slowly tightening its grip on him. As the rains poured down, Kofi noticed something unsettling. The rain did not stop. Days turned into weeks, and soon the village was flooded. What had started as a blessing was turning into a disaster. The river swelled beyond its banks, and homes were destroyed. Villagers, who had once celebrated the rain, now looked to the sky with fear, wondering when it would end. Village elder Adisa came to Kofi's hut one evening as the rains beat heavily against the roof. His wise eyes seemed to see through Kofi, as though he knew the secrets the young hunter was keeping. The rains were a gift, Kofi, but gifts from the sky are rarely this relentless. Nature does not behave this way without reason, Adisa said quietly. Kofi shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The elder continued, Magic can twist even the best intentions. You must be careful, Kofi. The forest is out of balance, and I fear it has something to do with you. Kofi's heart raced. He wanted to confess everything, to tell Adisa about the drum and his wishes, but the fear of the elder's judgment silenced him. He nodded and promised to help the village as best he could, though inside he knew the truth. Desperate to stop the rain he had caused, Kofi ventured deep into the forest once more. He sought the ancient tree where he had found the drum, hoping it might offer some clue on how to reverse his wish. As he walked through the dense jungle, the drum hummed in his hands, its whispers growing louder, more insistent. When he reached the tree, Kofi knelt at its roots, pleading for guidance. I didn't mean to cause harm, he whispered to the forest. Please, show me how to undo what I have done. But the forest remained silent, and the rain continued to fall. Kofi felt the weight of his choices heavier than ever. There was no turning back. He had to find a way to stop the drum's magic, for it consumed everything he held dear. As the days passed, the flooding grew worse. The villagers were forced to flee their homes, taking shelter in higher ground. Kofi knew he had to act, but every attempt to fix his mistake only seemed to make things worse. Then, one night, the voice of the ancestor returned to him in a dream. To undo the damage, Kofi, you must give up what you hold most dear. The drum demands balance. Kofi awoke with a start, drenched in sweat. The ancestor's words echoed in his mind. To stop the rain, he would have to give up something precious. But what could that be? The answer came to him slowly, and with it, a deep sadness. He knew what he must do. The drum's power had given him so much, but now it was time to let go. Kofi spent the night sleepless, the drum resting beside him like a dark presence. The rain continued to pour, constant reminder of his latest wish. He paced his small hut, wrestling with the ancestors' words. "What I hold most dear," Kofi whispered to himself. He thought of his strength, newfound knowledge, his power over the forest, and then it became clear. He had to give up the drum. The thought terrified him. The drum had granted him everything he had ever wished for. It had made him stronger, wiser, and capable of protecting the village. But now it was causing more harm than good. Kofi knew the magic was too dangerous, and if he didn't stop, it would destroy not just the village, but himself. With a heavy heart, Kofi made his decision. He would return the drum to the forest, where it belonged. The next morning, as the rain continued to flood the village, Kofi wrapped the drum in cloth and prepared to make the long journey back to the ancient tree. He did not tell anyone of his plan, not even Kwame or Amma. This was something he had to do alone. With determination, he set off into the jungle, the path ahead slippery and dangerous from the endless rain. As Kofi walked deeper into the forest, he felt the drum vibrating beneath the cloth as if it were resisting his decision. The whispers became louder, promising him more power, more control, if only he kept it. "You could be the ruler of the land," a voice tempted. "You could save not just your village, but the entire kingdom." Kofi shook his head, refusing to listen. He knew now that the drum's promises were empty. Power without balance was a curse. As Kofi neared the ancient tree, the jungle seemed to close in around him. The animals he had once felt connected to now watched him warily from the shadows, their eyes glowing in the dim light. The drum's magic had changed the forest, and it no longer felt like the familiar place Kofi had known since childhood. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs made his heart race. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the trees, a leopard, sleek and powerful, blocking Kofi's path. Its golden eyes locked onto his, and Kofi realized it was the same animal he had saved with herbs many weeks ago. The leopard seemed to be testing him, as if the forest itself was challenging Kofi's resolve. He stood still, meeting the animal's gaze. After a tense moment, the leopard stepped aside, allowing Kofi to pass. The forest had given him a chance, but it was clear that it would not offer many more. When Kofi finally reached the ancient tree, the sky above roared with thunder. The roots of the great tree seemed to pulse with life, just as they had the first time he found the drum. Kofi knelt at the base of the tree, feeling the weight of the drum in his hands. He unwrapped it slowly, the symbols glowing brightly in the rain. The whispers were almost deafening now, urging him to make another wish, to use the drum one last time. Kofi knew better. "I won't make any more wishes," he said aloud, his voice steady despite the storm around him. "You've given me enough, and I've learned what I needed." With a deep breath, Kofi placed the drum at the base of the tree, pushing it into the roots where he had first found it. The moment he released it, the whisper stopped. The forest went silent, as if holding its breath. As Kofi stepped back from the tree, the sky began to clear. The rain, which had poured for weeks, finally ceased. Rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, shining down on the village in the distance. Kofi fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of his decision. He had given up the power that could have made him unstoppable, but in doing so, felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. In that moment, Kofi felt a presence behind him. He turned to see the glowing figure of the ancestor from his vision. She smiled at him, her eyes filled with approval. "You have done well, Kofi," she said. "By returning the drum, you have restored the balance of the forest. But more than that, you have proven that true power lies not in what you can take, but in what you can give up." Kofi bowed his head in respect. "I didn't think I was strong enough," he admitted. The ancestor knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Strength comes not from magic, but from the heart. You will always be a hunter, Kofi, but now you are also a protector of this land. Remember that." With those words, the ancestor faded into the light, leaving Kofi alone but no longer afraid. When Kofi returned to the village, the people were overjoyed. The rain had finally stopped, and the floodwaters began to recede. Crops, which had nearly been destroyed, showed signs of life once more, and the villagers set to work rebuilding their homes. Kofi helped where he could, but he kept his experience with the drum to himself. He knew that the magic of the forest was not something to be shared lightly. As he worked, Kwame and Amma approached him, their faces filled with concern. "We've been looking for you, Kofi," Amma said. "Where did you go? The rain stopped just after you disappeared." Kofi smiled softly, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I went to make things right," he said simply, not offering more. Kwame and Amma exchanged a glance, but they didn't press him for answers. They trusted Kofi, knowing that whatever he had done, it had saved them all. The village slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Kofi was forever changed. He no longer sought power or wealth, and he found peace in the simple things, hunting with his friends, sitting by the fire, and listening to the stories of the elders. The forest, too, seemed to welcome him back. Whispers now kind and gentle, a reminder that he had earned its respect. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Kofi stood at the edge of the village, watching the sky turn shades of orange and red. Amma joined him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You're different now, Kofi," she said softly, "but it's a good difference. The village sees it too." Kofi nodded, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't known in a long time. "I had to learn the hard way," he admitted, "but I'm glad I did. The drum was never about the wishes. It was about understanding who I am and what I'm willing to sacrifice for the things that matter." Amma smiled, and together they watched the last of the sun dip below the horizon, knowing that the future, while uncertain, was full of hope. As the weeks passed, Kofi noticed something remarkable. Balance of the forest had truly been restored. The game returned in abundance, plants flourished, and the villagers spoke of an unusual calm in the air. Even the animals seemed less wary of Kofi, as if they sensed that the power he had once carried no longer threatened them. Kofi took this as a sign that his journey with the drum was complete. He had passed the test set before him, and in doing so, had earned the respect of the forest. The lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. Power, unchecked, could lead to ruin, but wisdom and sacrifice could restore balance. Kofi knew now that he had been chosen by the drum not for his strength or ambition, but for his heart. With the rains finally behind them, the village entered a period of healing and renewal. People worked together to rebuild their homes, repair the damage to the fields, and restore the village to its former beauty. Kofi helped where he could, but he found that his role had shifted. People looked to him not just as a skilled hunter, but as someone who had guided them through a time of great hardship. Though he never spoke openly about the drum, the villagers seemed to sense that Kofi had played a crucial part in ending the flood. His quiet leadership earned their respect, and his humility, in turn, brought them closer to him. As the village thrived once again, Kofi found joy in simple things, gathering with his friends around the fire, watching the children play, and feeling the warmth of the sun after so many weeks of rain. One evening, as the villagers gathered for a small feast to celebrate their successful harvest, Amma approached Kofi with a curious look in her eyes. Firelight flickered on her face, and she sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the glowing embers. "Kofi," she began quietly, "I know you won't tell us everything about what happened with the rains, but I have to ask, do you ever think about the power you gave up?" Kofi was silent for a moment, considering her question. He looked at the stars above, the same stars he had seen on the night he found the drum. "Sometimes," he admitted, "the drum had the power to give me anything I could wish for. It was tempting, Amma, but I learned that having everything isn't the same as being content. That kind of power demands too much." Amma nodded, understanding. "I've seen how you've changed since you returned the drum," she said softly. "You seem more at peace now, like you found something deeper than power." Kofi, as the weeks passed, Kofi noticed something remarkable. Balance of the forest had truly been restored. The game returned in abundance, plants flourished, and the villagers spoke of an unusual calm in the air. Even the animals seemed less wary of Kofi, as if they sensed that the power he had once carried no longer threatened them. Kofi took this as a sign that his journey with the drum was complete. He had passed the test set before him, and in doing so, had earned the respect of the forest. The lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. Power, unchecked, could lead to ruin, but wisdom and sacrifice could restore balance. Kofi knew now that he had been chosen by the drum not for his strength or ambition, but for his heart. With the rains finally behind them, the village entered a period of healing and renewal. People worked together to rebuild their homes, repair the damage to the fields, and restore the village to its former beauty. Kofi helped where he could, but he found that his role had shifted. People looked to him not just as a skilled hunter, but as someone who had guided them through a time of great hardship. Though he never spoke openly about the drum, villagers seemed to sense that Kofi had played a crucial part in ending the flood. His quiet leadership earned their respect, and his humility, in turn, brought them closer to him. As the village thrived once again, Kofi found joy in simple things, gathering with his friends around the fire, watching the children play, and feeling the warmth of the sun after so many weeks of rain. One evening, as the villagers gathered for a small feast to celebrate their successful harvest, Amma approached Kofi with a curious look in her eyes. Firelight flickered on her face, and she sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the glowing embers. "Kofi," she began quietly, "I know you won't tell us everything about what happened with the rains, but I have to ask, do you ever think about the power you gave up?" Kofi was silent for a moment, considering her question. He looked at the stars above, the same stars he had seen on the night he found the drum. "Sometimes," he admitted, "the drum had the power to give me anything I could wish for. It was tempting, Amma, but I learned that having everything isn't the same as being content. That kind of power demands too much." Amma nodded, understanding. "I've seen how you've changed since you returned the drum," she said softly. "You seem more at peace now, like you found something deeper than power." Kofi smiled gently. "I have," he replied. "I've found that true strength is in knowing when to let go, not in how much you can hold on to." As the village thrived, Kofi began to take on a new role. He continued hunting, but his focus shifted toward mentoring the younger hunters, teaching them not just the skills of tracking and survival, but the deeper connection to the forest. He shared stories of respect for nature, emphasizing the balance between man and the world around him. The younger hunters admired Kofi's wisdom. They noticed how he moved through the forest with ease, almost as if it welcomed him. They followed his lead, learning to listen to the forest's whispers and understand its rhythms. Kofi's teachings reminded them that hunting was not just about survival. It was about understanding the world they lived in and preserving its harmony. One afternoon, Kofi was summoned to the elder's hut. Adisa had grown older, his steps slower, but his eyes still shone with wisdom. Kofi knelt before him, curious as to why he had been called. Adisa placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of both kindness and seriousness. "You've come far, Kofi," the elder said, voice calm but firm. "You have proven yourself to be a protector of the village and the forest. You carry a wisdom that few your age possess, and the village has noticed." Paused, his gaze penetrating. "I believe it is time for you to take on a greater responsibility. The people need someone to guide them, someone who understands not just strength, but the weight of leadership." Kofi was taken aback. He had never sought to lead, and the thought of it weighed heavily on him. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this, Elder Adisa," Kofi said slowly. "There are others, wiser than me, who could lead better." Adisa smiled knowingly. "That is precisely why you are ready, Kofi. A true leader knows the burden of power and does not seek it for themselves. The village trusts you, as does the forest. You are more than just a hunter now. You are a guide, protector. Think on it." As Kofi pondered the elder's words, he returned to the forest, seeking solace among the trees that had become his second home. He walked deep into the jungle, feeling the familiar pull of the earth beneath his feet and the songs of birds in the air. Here, he felt connected to something greater, something ancient. As Kofi sat beneath the ancient tree, he felt a presence around him, much like the one he had felt during his earlier visions. The forest seemed to come alive with energy, and the air around him shimmered with light. From the shadows, the spirit of the forest emerged, a large, ethereal figure, not unlike the ancestor he had seen before. But this time it was a guardian of the land, its form made of leaves, roots, and earth. "You have honored the balance, Kofi," the spirit said, its voice as old as time itself. "The drum was a test, and you passed. Now the forest welcomes you as its own." Kofi felt a surge of gratitude. He bowed his head in respect, knowing that this was the final confirmation that he had made the right choices. When Kofi returned to the village, he found that the people had gathered in the center, waiting for him. It seemed word had spread of the elder's offer, and the villagers wanted to speak with Kofi. He hesitated at first, unsure of what to say, but as he stood before them, the words came naturally. "I have learned much from the forest," Kofi began, his voice steady. "I have made mistakes and learned the cost of seeking too much. But I have also seen the power of balance, of respect for the land and each other. I do not seek to lead, but if you believe I can help guide us, then I will do my best to serve." The villagers murmured in agreement. They had seen Kofi's transformation firsthand and trusted his wisdom. Slowly, one by one, they stepped forward, offering their support. Kofi felt a deep sense of responsibility, but also a renewed strength. He wasn't alone in this. His people stood with him. As the weeks passed, Kofi settled into his new role as a guide and protector of the village. He worked closely with Elder Adisa, learning the responsibilities of leadership, but always staying true to the principles he had learned in the forest: balance, humility, and respect. Under Kofi's guidance, the village flourished. People grew closer to the land, and Kofi's teachings inspired a new generation of hunters who understood the importance of harmony between man and nature. The village became known throughout the region for its wisdom and prosperity, and people from other villages came seeking advice and guidance. Kofi had found his place, not as a ruler, but as a leader in harmony with the world around him. He no longer needed the drum's magic, for he had discovered a far greater power within himself. The power to lead with wisdom, protect with compassion, and to live in balance with the world. As Kofi settled into his role as a protector of the village, word of his wisdom and leadership spread to neighboring clans. One day, messengers arrived from the distant hills, bringing news that the village chiefs wished to meet with Kofi. They had heard of the balance he had restored to his land, and sought his counsel. The meeting, known as the Gathering of the Clans, was a rare event where leaders from across the region came together to share knowledge and resolve disputes. Kofi had never attended such a gathering, but Elder Adisa encouraged him to go. "The wisdom of one village can heal many," Adisa said, his voice calm yet firm. "You have much to offer, Kofi. Trust in yourself." Though nervous, Kofi agreed. He understood that his village's prosperity could be shared with others, and perhaps he could help the wider region find the same harmony with the land. With that, Kofi prepared to leave for the distant hills, where the future of many clans would be shaped. The journey to the Gathering of the Clans was long and treacherous, with rugged terrain and unpredictable weather. Kofi traveled with a small group of hunters, including Kwame and Amma, who insisted on accompanying him. "You shouldn't make this journey alone," Kwame said with a grin. "Besides, I'm not missing out on the chance to see you in action." As they ventured deeper into the hills, Kofi felt the weight of his new responsibility. This was no ordinary hunt. He was about to meet the leaders of powerful clans, each with their own struggles and expectations. The thought of guiding so many people filled him with doubt, but Amma's reassuring presence helped calm his nerves. "You've always known what to do, Kofi," she said. "Just follow your instincts. Forest chose you for a reason." By the time they reached the great clearing where the clans had gathered, Kofi's resolve had strengthened. He was ready to listen, to learn, and to offer what guidance he could. When Kofi and his companions arrived, the Gathering of the Clans was already in full swing. Chiefs from many villages sat in a large circle, their faces lined with the burdens of leadership. As Kofi stepped into the clearing, all eyes turned to him. He felt the weight of their expectations, stood tall, remembering the lessons the forest had taught him. The discussions began, with each chief sharing the struggles of their people. There were disputes over land, dwindling resources, and clashes between villages. Kofi listened carefully, noting that many of these conflicts stemmed from a lack of respect for the land's natural balance, something he had experienced firsthand with the magical drum. When his turn came to speak, Kofi's voice was steady but humble. "I have learned that the land provides for us all, only if we respect its limits," he said. "There is power in nature, far greater than any one village or chief. We must work with it, not against it. The forest has shown me that balance is the key to prosperity." Some chiefs nodded in agreement, while others were skeptical. But Kofi's calm demeanor and the strength of his words began to resonate. They saw that he spoke not from ambition, but from experience. And slowly, the discussions shifted toward finding common ground. Among the gathered chiefs was one known as Chief Otieno, leader of the clan of the river. His village was located at the headwaters of the great river that provided water to many clans downstream. Recently, disputes had arisen over the use of the river's resources, and the tension between the villages was growing. Chief Otieno stood, his eyes locked on Kofi. "You speak of balance, young hunter, but tell me, how would you solve the problems of my people? The river is our lifeblood, yet others demand what is ours. Should we weaken ourselves for their sake?" Kofi felt the weight of the question, but he did not flinch. He thought back to the lessons of the forest, the endless rains that had nearly drowned his village when he sought too much. "Chief Otieno," Kofi began, "the river flows for all, just as the rain falls for all. If one village takes too much, others will suffer. But if we share the river, we ensure that it continues to flow for generations. The land does not belong to us, we belong to it." There was a moment of silence, and then Chief Otieno spoke again, his tone softened. "You are wise, Kofi. Perhaps there is a way for us to find balance, as you say." Kofi's heart lightened. He had not solved the problem, but he had planted a seed of understanding. As the days of the gathering of the clans continued, Kofi's influence grew. The chiefs listened to his words and began to see the value of working together rather than competing for resources. Kofi shared stories of his village's prosperity after the flood, explaining how they had rebuilt by respecting the natural order of the land. Slowly, the discussions shifted from conflict to collaboration. On the final day of the gathering, a plan was set in motion to create a council of chiefs, where decisions about land and resources would be made together, with the guidance of elders and those who understood the land's rhythms, hunters like Kofi. It was a historic moment, and though Kofi was not a chief, his voice had been instrumental in shaping this new alliance. Before departing, Chief Otieno approached Kofi and offered him a small carved figure of a river god. "This is a symbol of our unity," he said. "You have helped us see that we are stronger together than apart. Let this remind you that the river flows because it is fed by many streams." When Kofi and his companions returned to their village, they were greeted with celebration. Word of the gathering of the clans had spread quickly, and the villagers were proud of the role Kofi had played. Kofi, however, felt a deep sense of humility. He had not gone to seek glory, but to help others, just as Elder Adisa had taught him. As the sun set over the village, Kofi stood once more at the edge of the forest, feeling the cool breeze on his face. The drums of celebration echoed behind him, but his mind was calm. He thought of the journey he had made, from a young hunter, eager for power, to a guide and protector, trusted by many. Amma joined him, her eyes reflecting the last light of the day. "You did it, Kofi," she said softly. "The clans have come together because of you." Kofi smiled, but his thoughts were distant. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "Forest, the ancestors, and the village all played their part. I only listened." Chief Otieno stood, his eyes locked on Kofi. "You speak of balance, young hunter, but tell me, how would you solve the problems of my people? The river is our lifeblood, yet others demand what is ours. Should we weaken ourselves for their sake?" Kofi felt the weight of the question, but he did not flinch. He thought back to the lessons of the forest, the endless rains that had nearly drowned his village when he sought too much. "Chief Otieno," Kofi began, "the river flows for all, just as the rain falls for all. If one village takes too much, others will suffer. But if we share the river, we ensure that it continues to flow for generations. The land does not belong to us, we belong to it." There was a moment of silence, and then Chief Otieno spoke again, his tone softened. "You are wise, Kofi. Perhaps there is a way for us to find balance, as you say." Kofi's heart lightened. He had not solved the problem, but he had planted a seed of understanding. As the days of the gathering of the clans continued, Kofi's influence grew. The chiefs listened to his words and began to see the value of working together rather than competing for resources. Kofi shared stories of his village's prosperity after the flood, explaining how they had rebuilt by respecting the natural order of the land. Slowly, the discussions shifted from conflict to collaboration. On the final day of the gathering, a plan was set in motion to create a council of chiefs, where decisions about land and resources would be made together, with the guidance of elders and those who understood the land's rhythms, hunters like Kofi. It was a historic moment, and though Kofi was not a chief, his voice had been instrumental in shaping this new alliance. Before departing, Chief Otieno approached Kofi and offered him a small carved figure of a river god. "This is a symbol of our unity," he said. "You have helped us see that we are stronger together than apart. Let this remind you that the river flows because it is fed by many streams." When Kofi and his companions returned to their village, they were greeted with celebration. Word of the gathering of the clans had spread quickly, and the villagers were proud of the role Kofi had played. Kofi, however, felt a deep sense of humility. He had not gone to seek glory, but to help others, just as Elder Adisa had taught him. As the sun set over the village, Kofi stood once more at the edge of the forest, feeling the cool breeze on his face. The drums of celebration echoed behind him, but his mind was calm. He thought of the journey he had made, from a young hunter, eager for power, to a guide and protector, trusted by many. Amma joined him, her eyes reflecting the last light of the day. "You did it, Kofi," she said softly. "The clans have come together because of you." Kofi smiled, but his thoughts were distant. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "Forest, the ancestors, and the village all played their part. I only listened." Kofi understood the gravity of the elder's words. Drought was not merely a natural occurrence. It was a signal from the land. He decided that he would once again seek answers from the forest. But this time, his journey would take him farther than ever before, deep into the unknown parts of the jungle where few dared to go. With a small group of trusted hunters, including Kwame and Amma, Kofi set out. They carried only what they needed, leaving the comforts of the village behind. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, the familiar paths gave way to dense, uncharted wilderness. The air grew thick, and the towering trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows on the forest floor. For days they trekked through the unforgiving terrain, searching for signs of what had caused the land's unrest. They encountered strange creatures, ancient trees, and whispered winds that seemed to carry messages from the spirits. Kofi could feel the pulse of the forest, but the answer to its distress remained elusive. After nearly a week of traveling, Kofi's group stumbled upon a valley unlike anything they had ever seen. It was hidden deep within the jungle, surrounded by mountains and filled with vibrant plant life. In the center of the valley stood a massive tree, its roots spread out like veins across the land. The tree seemed ancient, older than anything Kofi had encountered before. Its bark shimmered in the light, and its leaves rustled with a mysterious energy. "This is it," Kofi whispered, feeling a deep connection to the tree. "This place holds the answer." As they approached the tree, they noticed something unsettling. Though the valley appeared lush, the soil around the tree was cracked and dry. The tree's leaves were turning brown, and the air around it felt heavy with sorrow. Kofi knelt beside the tree, placing his hand on its trunk. In that moment, he felt a surge of energy flow through him. Visions of the past, of ancient times when the land was whole, and of something that had gone terribly wrong. The tree, it seemed, was not just any tree. It was the heart of the forest, the source from which all life flowed. And now, was dying. As Kofi closed his eyes, the tree spoke to him, not in words but in feelings and images. He saw the history of the land, the balance that had been carefully maintained for centuries, and the forces that had threatened it. He saw a shadow, dark and menacing, leaping through the jungle, draining the life from the forest. Kofi's eyes snapped open. "There's something here," he said, turning to Kwame and Amma. "Something that is poisoning the land." Amma frowned, her eyes scanning the valley. "But where? Everything looks so full of life." "It's hidden," Kofi said, his voice firm, "and it's close." As they explored the valley, Kofi's senses guided him to a cave at the far end, hidden beneath thick vines and moss. The air around the cave felt wrong, cold, heavy, and unnatural. Kofi could feel the presence of something dark inside, something that did not belong to the natural order of the forest. Without hesitation, Kofi and his companions entered the cave. Inside, the walls were etched with symbols, markings that seemed to pulse with dark magic. In the center of the cave, they found the source of the forest's distress, an ancient, cursed object, buried deep in the earth. It was a small black stone, pulsing with a malevolent energy that radiated outward, slowly poisoning the land around it. Kofi stared at the stone, feeling the weight of its dark power. "This is it," said. "This is what's been disrupting the balance." Kofi approached the cursed stone cautiously. Its energy was unlike anything he had ever encountered before, far darker than the magic of the drum. As he reached out to touch it, he felt a wave of cold wash over him, pulling at his strength, trying to draw him into its shadow. For a moment, Kofi hesitated, remembering the temptation he had felt with the drum. This time, he knew better. This object did not offer power. It offered destruction. "We need to remove it," Amma said, voice steady. "Poisoning the land. If we don't stop it, the drought will spread, and the forest will die." Kofi nodded, though he knew that simply removing the stone wouldn't be easy. Its dark magic had rooted itself deep into the earth, and any attempt to move it could have dangerous consequences. But Kofi also understood that leaving it in place would only worsen the damage. With great care, Kofi and his companions began to dig around the stone, loosening the earth that had held it for centuries. As they worked, the dark energy from the stone grew stronger, wrapping itself around them like tendrils of shadow. Kofi could feel its pull, but he focused on the task at hand, refusing to let fear take over. Just as they lifted the stone from the ground, a powerful gust of wind surged through the cave, knocking them off their feet. The shadows in the cave swirled around them, and Kofi could hear faint whispers, similar to the ones he had heard from the drum. Stone was trying to protect itself, fighting back against those who sought to remove it. But Kofi was not the same person he had been when he found the drum. He had grown wiser, stronger, and more attuned to the forest's balance. He steadied himself and called upon the connection he had forged with the land. "We are here to restore balance," Kofi whispered, placing his hands on the stone. "Not to take, to heal." As Kofi channeled his energy into the stone, the shadows began to recede. Cursed object trembled in his hands, and for a moment it seemed as though the darkness would overwhelm him. Kofi's resolve never wavered. He was no longer tempted by power. He sought only to restore harmony. With one final push, the stone's dark energy dissipated, leaving behind only a faint shimmer of light. The weight lifted from the air, and the cave, once filled with dark magic, was now quiet. Kofi held the stone in his hands, now cold and lifeless. Curse had been broken. As they exited the cave, the valley felt different, lighter, calmer. The ancient tree, once dying, now seemed to breathe new life. Its leaves rustled softly in the wind, and Kofi knew that the forest's heart was healing. The balance had been restored. With the cursed stone safely buried in the earth far from the village, Kofi and his companions returned home. As they re-entered the village, they noticed the changes immediately. The air was fresh, the river flowed again, and the crops that had withered were beginning to sprout once more. The land had responded to their actions, and the village was saved. The people welcomed them back with open arms, grateful for what Kofi and his team had done. Kofi, however, felt no need for praise. He had learned long ago that true leadership wasn't about seeking glory. It was about protecting what mattered most: its people and the land they lived on. With the balance restored, the village entered a new era of hope and prosperity. The drought was over, the crops thrived, and the animals returned in abundance. The people rejoiced, but Kofi remained humble, quietly overseeing the healing of the land. He knew that the work of maintaining balance was never done, and that he would always need to be vigilant. Kofi's reputation as a leader who understood the ways of the forest spread even farther, and more villages began to seek his guidance. The council of chiefs that had formed during the gathering of the clans flourished, with Kofi's voice becoming one of the most respected in the region. Yet, despite his growing influence, Kofi never forgot his roots as a simple hunter. He continued to hunt with his friends, teach the younger generation, and find peace in the quiet moments within the forest. One evening, as Kofi walked through the village, he was called to Elder Adisa's hut. The elder, now much weaker and nearing the end of his life, had a calmness about him that seemed to transcend his frail body. Kofi knelt beside him, knowing that his mentor's time was coming to an end. "You have done well, Kofi," Adisa said, his voice soft but filled with pride. "You have guided the village through storms, droughts, and darkness. Forest speaks to you as it does to few others." Kofi felt a deep sense of gratitude, but also sadness. "I learned from you, Elder," he said. "You showed me the way when I didn't know how to listen to the forest." Adisa smiled, his eyes closing slightly as he breathed in the evening air. "You were always meant to follow this path, Kofi. The forest chose you, but now you must prepare for the future. My time is ending, and you will need to take my place among the Council of Elders." Kofi was silent for a moment, the weight of the elder's words sinking in. He had never imagined himself as an elder, keeper of wisdom and tradition, but now he understood that this was where his journey had led him. "I will do my best," Kofi promised, his voice steady despite the emotions stirring inside him. Elder Adisa nodded, and with a final smile, he closed his eyes, drifting into a peaceful rest. Kofi sat by his side, honoring the man who had guided him through his early years, knowing that the time had come for him to step into a new role. When news of Elder Adisa's passing spread through the village, people gathered to mourn and celebrate his life. He had been a pillar of wisdom for many generations, and his loss was felt deeply by all. In keeping with tradition, the village held a ceremony to honor Adisa's spirit, offering prayers and songs to the ancestors, asking them to welcome him into their midst. During the ceremony, Kofi was officially named as a member of the Council of Elders. It was a solemn moment, and Kofi accepted the responsibility with humility. Though he had spent much of his life learning from the land, he knew that the role of an elder was more than just guiding the forest. It was about protecting the spirit of the people, their stories, and their tradition. As Kofi stood before the village, he spoke not of power or leadership, but of unity. "Elder Adisa taught us that the land and the people are one," he said, his voice carrying through the crowd. "If we respect the balance of the forest, we ensure our future. We must continue to honor the lessons of those who came before us and pass them on to those who will come after." People nodded in agreement, their faith in Kofi growing stronger with each word. The torch had been passed, and the village knew they were in capable hands. One night, several weeks after Adisa's passing, Kofi sat alone near the fire, reflecting on all that had transpired. His mind wandered back to the day he first found the magical drum. The memory of its power and the temptation it had brought still lingered, though the lessons he had learned from it were now ingrained in his soul. As the fire crackled softly, Kofi sensed a presence beside him. Turning, he saw the glowing figure of the ancestor who had visited him in his visions, the same spirit who had warned him of the dangers of the drum. The ancestor's eyes were kind, and she smiled at him, as if acknowledging the path he had taken. "You have done well, Kofi," the ancestor said, her voice a gentle echo in the night air. "You have faced the trials of greed, darkness, and imbalance, and you have emerged with a heart that understands the true nature of power." Kofi bowed his head, humbled by her presence. "I was guided by the forest," he said, "and by the wisdom of those who came before me." The ancestor nodded. "Yes, but it was your strength and humility that allowed you to hear those lessons. The drum was a test, as was the cursed stone. You faced both without losing yourself, and now the land is at peace once again." Kofi looked up at the ancestor, his heart filled with questions. Will there always be darkness that tries to upset the balance? Will the land ever be truly free of such dangers? The ancestor's smile faded slightly. "The land will always face challenges, Kofi. There will always be forces that seek to disrupt the harmony of life. But as long as there are those like you, people who listen, who protect, and who guide, the balance will endure." With those words, the ancestor's figure slowly faded into the night, leaving Kofi alone by the fire, her message lingering in the air. He understood now that his journey as a protector of the land would never truly end. But he was ready for whatever lay ahead. As time passed, Kofi grew into his new role as an elder, and his responsibilities deepened. The Council of Elders often called upon him for his insights, especially when it came to matters of the land and its protection. Kofi worked tirelessly to ensure that the forest remained in balance, guiding the hunters, farmers, and villagers alike in their interactions with nature. But with leadership came challenges. Some in the village, particularly the younger generation, were eager for change, believing that Kofi's emphasis on tradition and balance was holding them back from greater progress. They wanted to expand their village, to take more from the land in order to grow stronger and wealthier. They did not see the danger in overreaching, in upsetting the delicate balance that Kofi had worked so hard to maintain. Kofi listened to their concerns, but remained firm in his beliefs. "The land has provided for us because we respect it," he explained during one of the council meetings. "If we take more than what is needed, we risk losing everything. Forest does not forget, and neither should we." Some accepted his wisdom, but others, particularly those with ambition in their hearts, continued to push for more. Kofi realized that the greatest challenge he now faced was not external, but internal, keeping the village united and ensuring that they did not fall prey to the same temptations that had once nearly consumed him. As the village prospered under Kofi's leadership, whispers of greed began to spread. A small group of villagers, led by a man named Bako, began to challenge Kofi's teachings, arguing that the village could become far more powerful if they took more from the land. Bako, a charismatic and ambitious man, claimed that Kofi's caution was holding them back from their true potential. "The forest is vast, and we have only scratched the surface of its riches," Bako told the villagers during a gathering. "Why should we limit ourselves when there is so much more to gain? We could trade with distant lands, build a grander village, and become the most powerful clan in the region." Kofi listened to Bako's words, feeling the familiar chill of temptation in the air. He recognized the danger in Bako's ambition. It was the same hunger for power that the drum had once stirred within him. Kofi also knew that confronting Bako with anger or force only deepened the divide. Instead, Kofi chose a different path. He called for a gathering of the entire village, where he could address their concerns directly and remind them of the lessons of the forest. On the day of the gathering, the village assembled in the great clearing, waiting for Kofi to speak. Bako stood among them, supporters close by, their eyes filled with anticipation. Kofi took his place in front of the council of elders, his heart steady but his mind focused. He knew this was a pivotal moment, one that could determine the future of the village. As Kofi stood before them, he began with a story of his own journey, from the moment he found the magical drum to the time he nearly lost everything to the rains and the cursed stone. He spoke of the temptations of power and the dangers of greed, and how he had learned that true strength came not from taking more, but from giving back. "The land is alive," Kofi said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "It provides for us because we respect its balance. But if we forget that balance, if we take more than what is given, we will lose everything. I have seen this with my own eyes, and I know that the path of greed leads only to ruin." Bako listened, expression unreadable. Some of his followers seemed moved by Kofi's words, while others remained skeptical. But Kofi knew that his message had struck a chord. The village had prospered under his guidance because they had respected the land, and that was a truth that even Bako could not deny. After Kofi finished speaking, the village fell into a thoughtful silence. The elders, too, seemed deep in contemplation. Then, one by one, the villagers began to voice their thoughts. Some sided with Bako, believing that the village could achieve greater things by expanding and taking more from the land. Many others supported Kofi's vision, understanding that the balance they had achieved was fragile and worth protecting. Bako, sensing that his support was waning, stepped forward. "You speak of balance, Kofi, but what if the balance changes? What if the forest can provide more than we think?" he asked, his tone challenging but not disrespectful. Kofi met Bako's gaze. "The balance is not something we control, Bako. It is something we honor. If we take more, the land will respond, and not in ways we can predict. The forest has its own will, its own life. It has tested me, and I have seen what happens when we try to force our will upon it." Bako was silent for a moment, then nodded, though it was unclear whether he fully accepted Kofi's words. The tension in the village eased, but Kofi knew that the challenge of greed would always linger. He had succeeded in keeping the village united for now, but he also understood that the path forward would not always be easy. After the village gathering, tentative peace settled over the land. People continued to thrive under Kofi's guidance, and the Council of Elders worked together to maintain balance between the needs of the village and the demands of the land. Bako, though quieted for now, remained in the village, his ambitions not entirely extinguished. Kofi knew that the challenge of greed could resurface at any time. For the moment, harmony prevailed. Kofi used this time to focus on strengthening the bonds within the village. He spent more time teaching the younger hunters, guiding them in the ways of the forest, and ensuring they understood the delicate relationship between the people and the land. He also continued to seek counsel from the spirits of the forest, deepening his connection to the ancient wisdom that had always guided him. But despite the peace, Kofi could not shake the feeling that something darker was looming. The forest, once calm and welcoming, seemed to whisper more frequently. The winds carried messages he could not fully understand, and the animals seemed restless, as though they sensed something approaching. Kofi tried to push the unease aside, but in his heart he knew that the village would soon face a new trial. One afternoon, while Kofi was out hunting with Kwame and Amma, they came across something unexpected. A stranger, weak and wounded, lying near the edge of the forest. The man was dressed in unfamiliar clothes, and his skin was marked with strange tattoos that none of them recognized. He appeared to be on the brink of death, his breaths shallow and labored. Kofi knelt beside the man, offering him water and trying to assess his injury. "Who are you?" Kofi asked gently, but the man could barely speak. His eyes flickered with fear and desperation. The shadow is coming," he whispered before collapsing into unconsciousness. Kwame and Amma exchanged worried glances. "What do you think he means?" Amma asked, her voice low with concern. "I don't know," Kofi replied, his brow furrowed. "But we need to take him back to the village. He may know something important." With great care, they carried the stranger back to the village, where the healers tended to his wounds. Though the man remained unconscious, his warning about a shadow stayed with Kofi. He could feel the unease in the forest growing stronger, and now, with the arrival of this stranger, it seemed as though the darkness was drawing closer. For 2 days, the stranger hovered between life and death, his fever raging and his body trembling with the effects of his journey. The village healers did all they could, but it was not until the 3rd day that the man opened his eyes. He was weak but conscious, and Kofi sat beside him, eager to learn what had brought him to their land. The man introduced himself as Malik, a traveler from a distant village that had once thrived at the edge of a great desert. His story was one of ruin and despair. Malik's village had been prosperous, much like Kofi's, until a shadow fell upon the land, a mysterious, dark force that drained the life from the soil and the water from the rivers. Crops withered, animals fled, and the people were left to starve. Kofi used this time to focus on strengthening the bonds within the village. He spent more time teaching the younger hunters, guiding them in the ways of the forest, and ensuring they understood the delicate relationship between the people and the land. He also continued to seek counsel from the spirits of the forest, deepening his connection to the ancient wisdom that had always guided him. But despite the peace, Kofi could not shake the feeling that something darker was looming. The forest, once calm and welcoming, seemed to whisper more frequently. The winds carried messages he could not fully understand, and the animals seemed restless, as though they sensed something approaching. Kofi tried to push the unease aside, but in his heart he knew that the village would soon face a new trial. One afternoon, while Kofi was out hunting with Kwame and Amma, they came across something unexpected. A stranger, weak and wounded, lying near the edge of the forest. The man was dressed in unfamiliar clothes, and his skin was marked with strange tattoos that none of them recognized. He appeared to be on the brink of death, his breaths shallow and labored. Kofi knelt beside the man, offering him water and trying to assess his injury. "Who are you?" Kofi asked gently, but the man could barely speak. His eyes flickered with fear and desperation. The shadow is coming," he whispered before collapsing into unconsciousness. Kwame and Amma exchanged worried glances. What do you think he means? Alma asked, her voice low with concern. I don't know, Kofi replied, his brow furrowed. But we need to take him back to the village. He may know something important. With great care, they carried the stranger back to the village, where the healers tended to his wounds. Though the man remained unconscious, his warning about a shadow stayed with Kofi. He could feel the unease in the forest growing stronger, and now, with the arrival of this stranger, it seemed as though the darkness was drawing closer. For 2 days, the stranger hovered between life and death, his fever raging and his body trembling with the effects of his journey. The village healers did all they could, but it was not until the 3rd day that the man opened his eyes. He was weak but conscious, and Kofi sat beside him, eager to learn what had brought him to their land. The man introduced himself as Malik, a traveler from a distant village that had once thrived at the edge of a great desert. His story was one of ruin and despair. Malik's village had been prosperous, much like Kofi's, until a shadow fell upon the land, a mysterious, dark force that drained the life from the soil and the water from the rivers. Crops withered, animals fled, and the people were left to starve. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Kofi felt the energy of the land shift. Trees seemed to hum with life, and the air was thick with the presence of ancient forces. Kofi led his group to the sacred tree where he had once returned the magical drum, knowing that it was a place where the spirits were strongest. Kofi knelt before the tree, closing his eyes and placing his hands on the roots. He could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him, and he began to speak softly, asking the spirits for their wisdom. For a long moment there was only silence, but then slowly a familiar presence surrounded him. The same spirit who had appeared to him before. Kofi. The spirit's voice echoed in his mind. The shadow you face is not new. It is an ancient force, older than this land itself. It was once sealed away, but something has disturbed it, and now it seeks to consume all life. Kofi's heart raced. How can we stop it? He asked. What can we do? The spirit's voice was gentle but firm. The shadow can only be defeated by those who understand the balance of life and death. It feeds on fear and chaos, but it can be weakened by unity and sacrifice. You must gather your people, Kofi. Unite them, for only together can you stand against the darkness. With those final words, the spirit faded and Kofi opened his eyes. The message was clear. The village must stand as one if they were to survive the coming storm. Kofi returned to the village, the renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the only way to face the shadow was through unity, and that meant healing the divide that had formed within the village. He called another meeting, this time addressing not just the council, the entire village. We have faced many challenges before, Kofi began, his voice calm but resolute. We have survived droughts, floods, and curses because we stood together. The shadow that approaches is powerful, but it feeds on our fear and our division. If we are to survive, we must unite as one. Forest has always guided us, and it will continue to do so if we trust in its wisdom. Bako stepped forward, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Kofi feared that Bako would continue to challenge him, but then, Kofi's surprise, Bako nodded. You are right, Kofi. The shadow will destroy us if we do not face it together. I have been too focused on fighting, but I see now that our strength lies in our unity. The village murmured in agreement, and slowly, the tension that had gripped them began to ease. Kofi's words had reached them, and the people understood that only by standing together could they hope to survive the coming darkness. With the village united once more, Kofi set about preparing for the arrival of the shadow. The elders consulted the ancient stories, seeking any knowledge of the force that Malik had warned them about. The hunters worked together to fortify the village, while the healers prepared for the inevitable battles that would come. Kofi, however, knew that their physical defenses would not be enough. The shadow was not just a threat to their bodies. It was a force that fed on their fears and doubts. He spent time with each of the villagers, reminding them of their strength, their connection to the land, and the power they held when united. As the days passed, the forest grew eerily quiet. The animals that usually roamed the jungle had disappeared, and the sky above seemed heavy with anticipation. Kofi could feel the tension in the air, knowing that the shadow was drawing closer with each passing moment. One night, the village was awakened by a strange, chilling wind that swept through the trees. The air grew cold, and a thick fog began to roll in from the edges of the forest. Kofi stood at the entrance of the village, his heart pounding as he watched the fog move closer, enveloping everything in its path. The shadow had arrived. Kofi gathered the villagers, instructing them to stay close and keep the fires burning. "Do not let fear take hold," he warned them. "The shadow feeds on it. Stay strong, and we will face this together." As the fog thickened, strange shapes began to emerge from the darkness, twisted figures that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. The villagers huddled together, their fear palpable. Kofi stood at the front, his eyes fixed on the shadowy forms. The battle for the village had begun. As the shadow descended upon the village, Kofi felt a deep chill seep into his bones. The thick fog swirled around the fires, dimming their light, and the strange shapes lurking within it drew closer. He'd hear faint whispers, like those he had heard from the cursed drum long ago, but these were darker, more sinister. They called out to the villagers, trying to sow fear and confusion. Kofi knew that if fear took hold, the shadow would consume them all. He stepped forward, standing tall, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Remember the forest. Remember the strength of the land that has always protected us. We are not alone. Together, we are stronger than this shadow." The villagers, though trembling, drew closer to Kofi. Fires flickered, and for a moment it seemed as though the darkness might overwhelm them. But Kofi's words held them together. He had faced the allure of power, the danger of greed, and the destruction of imbalance before. This was another trial, and they would face it as one. Suddenly, from the fog, a shadowy figure lunged at them. Kofi, armed with his spear, reacted quickly, blocking the attack. The figure dissolved into mist the moment his spear struck it. More were coming. The battle had begun. Shadow creatures emerged from the fog, twisting and shifting as they moved toward the villagers. Kofi and the hunters sprang into action, their spears and arrows cutting through the air. Though the creatures dissolved with each strike, more seemed to take their place, creeping closer with every passing second. "We can't fight them all," Kwame shouted, fending off one of the shadowy figures with his spear. "There are too many." Kofi's mind raced. He knew that this was not a battle they could win with brute strength. The shadow was feeding off their fear, growing stronger with each attack. They needed a different approach. "Light more fires," Kofi commanded. "We need more light to drive them back, and stay together. Don't let them separate us." Amma and the other hunters quickly set to work, gathering dry branches and kindling. The fires roared to life, casting a brighter glow over the village. The shadow creatures recoiled from the light, their forms flickering and fading as the flames grew higher. The villagers huddled closer, their fear slowly giving way to a growing sense of hope. But Kofi knew this was only the beginning. The shadow's true power had yet to be revealed. As the shadow creatures faltered, a new sound emerged from the depths of the fog. A deep, echoing voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was a voice filled with malice, and it spoke directly to the hearts of the villagers. "Why resist?" the voice whispered, though its tone was powerful. "I am inevitable. Your fires will burn out, your strength will fail, and you will fall. Surrender to me, and I will grant you peace. Fight, and you will suffer." The villagers shuddered as the voice washed over them. Even Kofi felt its weight like a cold hand gripping his soul. For a brief moment, doubt crept into his mind. Could they really defeat something so ancient, so powerful? What if the voice was right? But then he remembered the spirit's message. The shadow could only win if they gave in to their fear. Kofi raised his voice, cutting through the darkness. "We will not surrender. This land is ours, and we stand together as one." Voice hissed, "Please, you are fools. Your strength will not last. The shadow will consume you all." The shadow continued to press in on the village, but Kofi's defiance gave the people renewed strength. They huddled around the fires, determined to hold the line. Yet Kofi knew they needed more than courage. He needed the wisdom of the spirits to overcome this dark force. Kofi closed his eyes, focusing on the deep connection he had always felt with the forest. Reached out with his mind, calling to the spirits that had guided him through so many challenges. "Please help us," whispered. Show us the way to defeat this shadow." For a moment, there was only silence. But then, like a gentle breeze through the trees, the familiar presence of the forest spirit returned. Her voice was soft but filled with power. "Kofi, the shadow cannot be fought with weapons alone. It is a force of fear and despair. You must weaken it by reminding your people of hope, of life, and of the strength they carry within." Kofi's eyes snapped open, and the answer became clear. The shadow thrived on fear, but it could not stand against the light of unity and hope. He stood tall and called out to the villagers. "Listen to me. The shadow is strong because it feeds on our fear, but we are stronger. Think of all we have survived: droughts, floods, and darkness. We have always come through because we believe in each other, in the land, and in our ancestors. Hold on to that hope, and the shadow will fade." The villagers, emboldened by Kofi's words, began to chant together, calling upon their ancestors, singing songs of strength and courage. Fires blazed even brighter, and slowly, the shadow began to recede. As the villagers rallied together, Kofi noticed Bako standing at the edge of the crowd, his face filled with uncertainty. Bako had always been ambitious, eager for power and progress, but now he looked lost, unsure of his place in the battle. Kofi approached him, knowing that they needed Bako's strength in this fight. "Bako," Kofi said, his tone firm but understanding, "the shadow feeds on division. We need you. The village needs you. Stand with us." Bako hesitated, his gaze flickering between Kofi and the encroaching darkness. For a moment, it seemed as though he might refuse. But then, something in Bako shifted. He looked at the villagers, at the fires burning brightly, and nodded. "You're right, Kofi. I've been fighting for the wrong things. But no more. I will stand with you." Bako stepped forward, raising his voice to join the chants of the villagers. His presence seemed to strengthen their unity, and Kofi could feel the shadow weakening further. As the villagers continued to chant and sing, the shadow creatures began to lose their form, dissolving into wisps of smoke. The wind carried away. The fog that had enveloped the village thinned, and the air grew lighter. The voice of the shadow hissed in anger, but its power was waning. Kofi could feel it. The battle was not over yet. The shadow's voice returned, louder and more desperate. "You cannot defeat me. I am eternal. I will return again and again." Kofi stepped forward, standing at the center of the village, facing the last remnants of the shadow. "You will not return here," he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "This village, this land, belongs to those who live in harmony with it. You have no place here." With those final words, the villagers raised their voices one last time, their songs echoing through the trees. The light from the fires flared, and the last of the shadow creatures dissolved into the night. Fog lifted completely, revealing the stars above, bright and clear. The shadow was gone. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the village stood in silence, exhausted but victorious. The fires still burned, their warmth a comforting reminder of the strength they had found in each other. Kofi stood at the edge of the clearing, watching as the sun rose, bathing the land in golden light. The villagers began to stir, realizing that the danger had passed. They embraced one another, grateful to have survived the long night. Kwame and Amma approached Kofi, their faces filled with pride and relief. "You did it, Kofi," Amma said, her voice soft but full of admiration. "You saved us all." Kofi shook his head, a humble smile on his face. "We did it together," he replied. "The village was saved because we stood as one. That's the true power, the power of unity." Bako approached as well, his expression more subdued. "I'm sorry, Kofi," he said quietly. "I let my ambition blind me, but you showed me what really matters. I owe you and the village my loyalty." Kofi placed a hand on Bako's shoulder, his gaze warm. "You redeemed yourself when you stood with us. The village is stronger because of you." With the shadow defeated, Kofi knew that the village could now look toward a future filled with hope. They had faced a darkness more dangerous than any before. They had emerged stronger, more united, and more connected to the land than ever. With the shadow defeated and the dawn rising over the village, the people began to rebuild their lives. The damage caused by the fear and chaos of the night was visible. Some homes had been damaged, crops had suffered, and the emotional toll on the villagers was clear. But they were alive, and their spirits were stronger than before. They had survived, not by force, but by unity. Kofi and the Council of Elders met to discuss how to restore the village. "We have faced many challenges," Elder Amani said, her voice filled with wisdom. "But this was unlike any we've seen. The shadow tested us in ways we never imagined." Kofi nodded, his mind still processing the events of the night. The shadow was ancient, a force that fed on division and fear. We overcame it by standing together. That is how we will rebuild. We must make sure the land recovers, that the people heal, and that we do not let fear take root again. The council agreed, and over the following weeks, the villagers worked tirelessly to repair their homes and replant their fields. The forest, too, seemed to recover, as the animals returned and the trees, once weighed down by the shadow's presence, stood tall and strong again. Kofi made it his priority to ensure that not only the land but the people themselves healed. He spent time with those who had suffered the most during the shadow's invasion, families who connected, he said. The shadow fed on fear because we allowed it to take root. We must strengthen the bonds between us so that no darkness can break them. The elders agreed, and together they developed new rituals to honor the ancestors and the spirits of the land. These rituals would remind the villagers of their connection to the earth and to each other. Festivals were planned, where the people would gather to celebrate the land's bounty, and ceremonies were held to thank the ancestors for their protection. Bako, who had once sought power for himself, now played an important role in these rituals, helping to lead the people in songs and prayers. His transformation from an ambitious, divided man to a dedicated leader was a symbol of the village's own growth. As the years passed, the village continued to thrive, and Kofi's role as an elder deepened. The young hunters he had once mentored had grown into leaders themselves, and a new generation was emerging. Young men and women eager to learn from Kofi and the council. One of these young hunters, a boy named Kweku, reminded Kofi of himself when he was younger. Kweku was curious, bold, and sometimes impatient, always eager to explore the mysteries of the forest and the stories of the ancestors. Kofi took him under his wing, teaching him not only the skills of a hunter, but the deeper lessons of balance, humility, and respect for the land. "Kweku," Kofi said one day as they walked through the forest, "strength is not measured by how much you can take from the land, by how much you can give back. The forest is alive, and it gives us everything we need, but we must protect it, just as it protects us." Kweku listened carefully, though Kofi could see the boy's restless spirit. "I understand, Elder Kofi," Kweku said, "but sometimes I feel like there's so much more to discover, like the forest is hiding secrets from us." Kofi smiled, remembering his own curiosity at Kweku's age. "The forest does have its secrets," he said, "but they reveal themselves in time. Patience is part of the journey." One night, as Kofi slept, he was visited by another vision. In this dream, he stood at the edge of a great river, watching as the water flowed peacefully through the land. The sky was clear, and the trees stood tall and green. The village thrived, the people smiling and working together in harmony. But as Kofi looked closer, he saw something on the horizon, a shadow, distant but moving slowly toward the village once again. This time, however, Kofi did not feel fear. Instead, he stood firm, knowing that the village was prepared. The shadow grew closer, but it never reached the village. The people, united and strong, stood as one, and the shadow receded, defeated before it could take root. When Kofi awoke, he understood the meaning of the dream. The shadow, like all challenges, would return in one form or another. But the village had learned how to protect itself, not just with weapons or fire, but with unity, hope, and trust in the balance of the land. As the years went by, Kofi grew older, and the time came for him to consider the future of the village. He had led them through many challenges, but now a new generation of leaders was ready to take on the responsibility of protecting the land. Kofi saw great potential in Kweku, the young hunter who had learned so much under his guidance. One day, as they walked through the forest, Kofi spoke to Kweku about the future. "You have learned much, Kweku," Kofi said. "Time will come when you will need to take on greater responsibilities. The village will look to you, just as it once looked to me." Kweku, though young, understood the weight of Kofi's words. "I will do my best to protect the village and the forest," he said, voice steady but filled with emotion. Kofi placed a hand on Kweku's shoulder. I know you will, but remember, leadership is not about having all the answers. It's about listening. Listening to the land, the people, and to your own heart. The forest will guide you, just as it has always guided me. In the years that followed, Kofi began to step back from his role as the primary leader of the village. He remained on the council of elders, offering guidance and wisdom, but he allowed Kweku and the younger leaders to take on more responsibility. Kofi watched with pride as Kweku grew into his role, leading the village with the same respect for the land and the people Kofi had always cherished. The village, now thriving and united, continued to honor the balance that Kofi had worked so hard to protect. The ancestors were remembered in every ceremony, spirits of the forest were thanked for their guidance, and the people lived in harmony with the land. Kofi, though older now, still walked through the forest every day, finding peace in the trees, the rivers, and the animals that had always been his companions. He knew that the village was in good hands, and that the balance would be maintained for generations to come. As the years passed, Kofi felt the call of the ancestors growing stronger. He knew that his time in the village was nearing its end, and that he would soon join those who had come before him. But there was no sadness in his heart, only peace. He had fulfilled his role, and the village was thriving. The land was in balance. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Kofi sat by the sacred tree where he had so often communed with the spirits. Closed his eyes, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves, feeling the earth beneath him. The forest, his oldest friend, whispered to him, comforting him as he prepared for his final journey. The ancestor spirit appeared once more, her light soft and welcoming. Kofi, she said, her voice filled with warmth. You have done well. The village is safe, balance is restored, and the people will remember your name for generations. Kofi smiled, his heart light. I was never alone, he said. The forest, the ancestors, and the people. Together, we protected the land. The spirit extended her hand, and Kofi, feeling the weight of the years lift from his shoulders, took it. Together, they walked into the light, leaving behind a village that would forever honor the balance of life and the wisdom of the forest. Though Kofi had departed to join the ancestors, his spirit remained woven into the fabric of the village and the forest. His teachings, wisdom, and humility were passed on to every child, every hunter, and every elder who lived in the village. Kweku, now the village's respected leader, felt the weight of that legacy every day, carried it with pride and a deep sense of responsibility. Under Kweku's guidance, the village continued to prosper. People spoke of Kofi with reverence, remembering him not only as a leader, but as a man who had understood the deeper connection between the land and its people. Every year, during the Festival of the Ancestors, they would gather to honor those who had come before them, and Kofi's name was always spoken with the greatest respect. But while the village thrived, the world around them was changing. New challenges arose, new villages seeking alliances, traders from distant lands bringing new ideas and ways of life. Kweku knew that the village would have to navigate these changes carefully, just as Kofi had taught him. The land's balance could not be sacrificed, even for the allure of wealth or progress. One day, as the village went about its daily routines, a stranger arrived at the gates. He was a tall man, dressed in fine robes, with skin weathered by the sun and eyes that held stories of distant lands. The villagers watched him with curiosity and caution as he approached Kweku. I come from beyond the great river, the man said, bowing respectfully. My name is Jahi, and I seek knowledge of the legendary hunter, Kofi. I have heard tales of his wisdom and the harmony he brought to this land. My people are in need of such wisdom. Kweku regarded Jahi carefully. The stories of Kofi had spread far, but he wondered what this stranger truly sought. Kofi's wisdom remains with us, Kweku said, its tone measured. But what brings you so far from your home? Jahi sighed, his eyes dark with concern. My village is on the brink of collapse. The rivers have dried, the land no longer bears fruit, and the people are divided. We have forgotten the ways of balance, and we suffer because of it. I have come to learn from those who still remember. The ancestor spirit appeared once more, her light soft and welcoming. Kofi, she said, her voice filled with warmth. You have done well. The village is safe, balance is restored, and the people will remember your name for generations." Kofi smiled, his heart light. "I was never alone," he said. "The forest, the ancestors, and the people. Together, we protected the land." The spirit extended her hand, and Kofi, feeling the weight of the years lift from his shoulders, took it. Together, they walked into the light, leaving behind a village that would forever honor the balance of life and the wisdom of the forest. Though Kofi had departed to join the ancestors, his spirit remained woven into the fabric of the village and the forest. His teachings, wisdom, and humility were passed on to every child, every hunter, and every elder who lived in the village. Kwaku, now the village's respected leader, felt the weight of that legacy every day, carried it with pride and a deep sense of responsibility. Under Kwaku's guidance, the village continued to prosper. People spoke of Kofi with reverence, remembering him not only as a leader, but as a man who had understood the deeper connection between the land and its people. Every year, during the Festival of the Ancestors, they would gather to honor those who had come before them, and Kofi's name was always spoken with the greatest respect. But while the village thrived, the world around them was changing. New challenges arose, new villages seeking alliances, traders from distant lands bringing new ideas and ways of life. Kwaku knew that the village would have to navigate these changes carefully, just as Kofi had taught him. The land's balance could not be sacrificed, even for the allure of wealth or progress. One day, as the village went about its daily routines, a stranger arrived at the gates. He was a tall man, dressed in fine robes, with skin weathered by the sun and eyes that held stories of distant lands. The villagers watched him with curiosity and caution as he approached Kwaku. "I come from beyond the great river," the man said, bowing respectfully. "My name is Jahi, and I seek knowledge of the legendary hunter, Kofi. I have heard tales of his wisdom and the harmony he brought to this land. My people are in need of such wisdom." Kwaku regarded Jahi carefully. The stories of Kofi had spread far, but he wondered what this stranger truly sought. "Kofi's wisdom remains with us," Kwaku said, its tone measured. "But what brings you so far from your home?" Jahi sighed, his eyes dark with concern. "My village is on the brink of collapse. The rivers have dried, the land no longer bears fruit, and the people are divided. We have forgotten the ways of balance, and we suffer because of it. I have come to learn from those who still remember." Jahi's return was met with a mixture of relief and skepticism. Many of the villagers were hopeful that he had found a solution to their problems, but others doubted that anything could restore the land. They had grown used to taking as much as they could, and the idea of changing their ways seemed impossible to them. Kwaku and Jahi began their work slowly, teaching the villagers about the ways of balance that Kofi had taught Kwaku. They showed them how to give thanks to the land, how to take only what was needed, and how to replenish the soil and the water sources instead of draining them. It was not an easy task. Many resisted, believing that these methods would take too long to show results. But others, especially the younger generation, eager to learn. They had grown up in a village that had known only hardship, and they were willing to try something new. Kwaku and Jahi taught them how to plant trees along the dry riverbeds, how to rotate crops to allow the soil to recover, how to respect the spirits of the land. Slowly, the land began to respond. The trees that had been planted started to grow, their roots holding the soil in place and helping to retain water. The crops became more abundant, and the animals began to return. The villagers, seeing these small but significant changes, began to believe that there was hope after all. But not everyone was convinced. Some of the older leaders in Jahi's village were resistant to the changes, arguing that they needed quick results, not slow growth. They pressured Jahi to abandon the methods he had learned from Kwaku and return to their old ways, which had once brought them wealth. "There is no time for patience," one of the elders said angrily. "We need food now. We need prosperity now." Jahi, though torn, remembered what Kwaku had told him. "Forest does not grow overnight," Kwaku had said. "It grows with care and time. If you force it, you will break it." Standing before the elders, Jahi spoke with confidence. "The old ways have failed us. If we return to them, we will only destroy the land further. But if we continue to work with the land, as Kwaku has taught us, we will rebuild what we have lost." The elders grumbled, but could not argue with the results they were beginning to see. Crops were growing, the rivers were beginning to flow again, and the people were slowly starting to believe in the power of balance. As the months passed, Jahi's village began to thrive once again. The changes that Kweku and Jahi had introduced were taking root, not just in the land, but in the hearts of the people. They had learned to respect the balance of the earth, to work with nature instead of against it. The village, once on the brink of collapse, now flourished. Jahi, who had once been filled with doubt, now stood as a leader who understood the true meaning of strength. He had learned from Kweku that leadership was not about control, but about guidance, patience, and humility. His people, too, had learned that prosperity could only come from living in harmony with the land. Kweku, having completed his mission, prepared to return to his own village. But as he left, he knew that Kofi's legacy had spread even further, beyond the borders of their home. The wisdom of balance was now a part of Jahi's people, and it would continue to grow with them. When Kweku returned to his village, he was welcomed back as a hero. The people had missed him, but they knew that his journey had been necessary. He told them of Jahi's village, how they had embraced the teachings of balance and harmony, and how they had begun to heal the land. The villagers were proud, knowing that Kofi's legacy had reached beyond their borders. The stories of Kofi, the brave hunter who had once held a magical drum, now carried with them the weight of generations of wisdom. The people understood that they were part of something greater, a cycle of life, growth, and balance that connected all people and all lands. Thank you so much for watching Bedtime Folktale. I hope you enjoyed this story and feel a little more relaxed and ready for sweet dreams. If you want more enchanting tales, be sure to subscribe, like, and share with your friends. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss another magical folktale. See you in the next story.